So, first thing I want to talk to you about today is cloudy iCloud. I think that's the best way to put it. I put iCloudy in the title for the show notes. There's a somewhat disturbing but very excellent post on Six Colors that I'm going to link you to that sort of triggered this conversation in my mind. A great article by Dan Morin. There will be a link to it in the show notes at mattcast.com, and I highly recommend you go read his whole harrowing experience and read the whole thing. But essentially what it comes down to is, I think, something that we've almost all experienced if we've used iCloud. Anybody who's used iCloud for a while, at some point, something goes south. Something just stops working. Might be all of iCloud. It might just be one service like email or calendar. And it suddenly is like unclear exactly why. And I think Dan calls it kind of the black box behavior. You know, stuff goes into iCloud, stuff comes out, and when it's working, it's awesome and it's great. But when it's not working, it's very, very hard to troubleshoot. And I would say typical troubleshooting, if you do run into iCloud issues, typical troubleshooting goes something like this. And I think you can fix a lot of issues by going through this process. So you're working with iCloud, some part of it or all of it stops working or syncing on maybe a device or multiple devices. And so you start troubleshooting. First thing you maybe do is quit your app, reload your app, restart your phone, restart your systems. Maybe you even go as far as restarting your network, trying to rule out anything going on locally, right? So you try all that. Maybe that works. Maybe that doesn't. You might go check Apple's system status page. So if you go to apple.com/support/system_status, that has the status of all their services. So that's a good thing to check too, right? Is iCloud actually down? Is Mail actually down? Is some service actually down? Is like photos, iCloud photo library down? Whatever you're having trouble with, make sure that's not happening. And then if all that seems to not fix the issue, then typically what I would do is go in and start turning off and turning back on the impacted service in iCloud on my device. So if I'm having trouble with calendar, I might go flip calendar syncing off, flip that back on, see if that doesn't reset it. And if none of that works, you get to the most extreme and what I consider to be maybe the most scary experience, although I've done it enough times now where I'm not as afraid to do it anymore as I am, and I'm learning to trust the syncing and backup of iCloud. Although I'm always a little bit leery, but I also have my physical backups, so I feel a little bit more comfortable with that, or my local backups. And but the most extreme option, logging out of iCloud on a device and logging back in, and it's a little bit frightening because it will warn you about all these things about syncing and keeping data locally and. Yeah, we've gone through the process, so you can go back and find other episodes of the Maccast if you want to talk about that. Or if you have questions about it, certainly send them to me and we can talk about it again. But basically, log out of iCloud, log back in, and I have found 95% of the time one of these things, either low end, just quitting and restarting your app, or toggling Wi-Fi on and off, or whatever it might be, that usually fixes the issue. Going all the way down to the extreme of logging out and logging back into iCloud. But any one of those things along the way will 95% of the time result in a fix to iCloud. And that's great. But what happens when that doesn't work? And this was the position Dan was in recently, and I certainly have run into myself as well. And then that's when you probably pick up the phone or go online, go to chat, whatever, and you contact Apple support, right? And typically they'll try to walk you through all the same stuff that you did. Now, if you get a good rep, they'll ask you if you've done all these things, and you can tell them, yep, I already tried all that other stuff. It's still not working. And then hopefully, generally, they will pass you on to maybe tier 2 support or someone higher up the chain because you've gone through all of the troubleshooting process. And they might walk you through it. They might make you go through it again. And if you just follow along, then eventually they'll try to help you out even further. And so Dan got past a tier 2 service, but here's what happened to him. And here's where, in my mind, it gets really, really interesting. So the rep looked at all these things and was going through his call. And he said at some point, then he just responded, "Oh, that explains it," without providing much detail. And he said, asked him to put on a hold, puts him on a hold, came back and just said, and I can't really tell you what's going on, but in about 12 hours, everything should be back to normal. If it isn't, give us a call back. And sure enough, 12 hours, almost to the dot later, everything just started magically working again. And thus you have the black box problem, right? Because why did it go down? Why did it break? Why was it only for me? And I think it's not an it was only for me case in a lot of cases. I think the way Apple has iCloud structured up is I think certain accounts are relegated to certain banks of servers. I don't believe it's just a single server, but I have a feeling there's like, sort of tranches of servers that we have our iCloud accounts in. And the one that, in this case, Dan was on just happened to be doing something at the time. Now, what was it doing? We will probably never really know because Apple's never really going to say. There's speculation. Apparently on Reddit, there are a lot of Apple users who claim that iCloud's servers will be sometimes just put into maintenance mode for, guess how long? Exactly 12 hours. But to Dan's point is like, any other service other than Apple, they would probably notify you, right? Hey, we're going to go into maintenance mode for 12 hours on Thursday from, this time to this time. So just be aware your services are going to be out. Apple doesn't do that. So if this is what they're doing, that's kind of bad support for iCloud, right? And it just further exacerbates the black box problem where we don't know what's going on. Now, another possibility I guess they talked about on one of the podcasts he's on was, maybe there was some sort of security thing like a subpoena or a national security letter. So Apple will get, if somebody is doing abuse or misuse on an iCloud account, they can get subpoenaed in a criminal thing, or they can get a national security letter, and that might require the shutdown of a server. And in that case, they may legally not be able to notify or let anybody know really what's going on. And so that could be a possibility there. But, overall, that's just kind of frustrating and, just shows we're at the mercy of, like, when we opt into iCloud, we're kind of at Apple's mercy in terms of, what's going on. But I don't know that that's just with Apple, right? That's almost any cloud service if you really think about it, right? You're sort of locked in to and at the mercy of what's ever happening on those servers, which, brings me back to I trust Apple and I trust iCloud. I use documents and desktops. I have my full, I have a lot of data and content there. But at the same time, I don't do that implicitly, right? I make sure I have local backups, my purchases. And I think I'm unusual in this. And I've talked about you doing this on the show as well. But, I do movie purchases on, Apple Movies. I make sure I download local copies of those and I back those up. I think a lot of people don't. I think a lot of people just think they're always going to be there to stream. And sometimes they're not. Sometimes studios and deals change and that stuff isn't there. So I make sure I have physical backups of that stuff. But the iCloud black box. So have you had experiences like this? Have you been in an outage for 12 hours? I don't know that I ever have, knock on wood, and I hope that never happens to me, but I certainly have had other problems. And hopefully, if you do, some of those tips that I just gave will help you out.